So, Bobby, you've been dreaming again.
Still don't know what it is or where it comes from, but there's something there. Where'd you see all this, Bobby?
Transmitting live from Planet X. It's the Live from Planet X podcast. I'm your host, Zaire, the Planet X ambassador. Today's special guest, the director of experiencer research for Mufon, the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, Kathleen Marden, is with us here tonight. So break out your binoculars, keep the pedal to the metal, do whatever you gotta do. Just keep it locked to the Live from Planet X podcast. Let's go.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Live from Planet X podcast. I'm your host, Robert, aka Zaire, Planet X ambassador. Tonight, we are blessed to interview Kathleen Marden. Kathleen Marden earned her BA in social work at the University of New Hampshire in 1971. Thereafter, she entered into graduate studies in education at the University of Cincinnati and later UNH. She began her professional career as a social worker and entered the field of education as a teacher. Later, she was promoted to a supervisory position, coordinating education programs and a supervising teacher. Since 1990, she left that career to pursue a career as a UFO investigator, researcher, and writer. Kathleen Marden, welcome to the Live from Planet X podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
Awesome. And I thank you so much for your time. Betty and Barney Hill, I understand Betty was you are Betty's niece.
Yes, absolutely. My mother was Betty's younger sister.
Okay, awesome. Now I did have a question. I noticed I was watching one of her interviews last night. When Betty and Barney were in the car, we'll get into about the abduction. It's a very popular case. It was actually the first reported UFO abduction case in the United States. But one thing I caught in the interview I was watching last night, she said that she remembered her sister telling her a story about she might have seen a UFO. Was that your mom?
That was my mother. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Can you tell me about your mom's experience? Because she didn't go into too much detail about it.
Yes. No, this was never mentioned until the morning of September 20th, or the afternoon of September 20th, 1961, after Betty called my mother and told her that she and my uncle had a close-up sighting of a UFO the night before. And my mother said to me, well, that she had seen one too. I was 13 years old.
Okay. And
a few years before that, probably around 1958, she was on her once a week grocery shopping trip. And she had another aunt in the car with her. And as they were driving along, they saw what we'd think of as a huge mothership. It was like a cigar-shaped craft, and there were smaller craft flying around it. They stopped the car, they got out, they ran to a neighbor's house, and those people came out too. So there were several witnesses to this craft, and they watched it as the smaller craft flew around it and then entered it.
Wow, awesome. That's amazing. Now, when you were 13 at that time, you heard about the story at that point when you were young like that?
Yes, I was 13, and it was never discussed in my family. So my mother had discussed it privately with my grandmother and grandfather, and also with Betty and Barney when it occurred, but had not told her children about it.
Very interesting. Have you had any type of strange dreams or visitations yourself where you think you may have been abducted?
There's a possibility. I've had strange dreams. I've had conscious recall of craft close up, that sort of thing. But I don't have enough scientific evidence that I could support my own case. So I don't discuss it.
Okay. Understood. Now, were you 13 when Betty and Barney's abduction happened?
I was 13, yes.
Okay. Did you notice after the fact, did you notice, my daughter wanted me to ask you this, did you notice any strange behavior in them yourself at that time?
Well, absolutely. After this occurred, I mean, before this occurred, Betty and Barney were very politically oriented. My entire family was active in the civil rights movement, proponents of human rights, that sort of thing. No interest in flying saucers or UFOs. And then Betty and Barney had this very, very strange experience when they were returning to their home on the seacoast of New Hampshire and were driving at night through the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There was immediately a change in their behavior. Betty was extremely curious. She wanted to learn as much as she possibly could about what had occurred. She was nervous that the craft had come so close to them that they might have been contaminated. And this is the reason she called my mother. We had a neighbor who was a physicist, and she was looking for information from him. So there was that concern as well. The craft had come within 100 feet of them.
That's amazing.
And yes, they saw it up very close. And Barney had observed non-human entities dressed in black shiny uniforms looking down at him, which frightened him greatly. Betty had no conscious recall of observing non-humans like Barney did. Wow. Barney just wanted to forget about it, to erase it from his conscious mind if he possibly could. He didn't want to talk about it. He told Betty that no good could come of telling anyone about what had happened.
Right.
And he was extremely distressed. So Betty's curious, Barney is distressed and wants to push it down and forget about it.
Mm-hmm. I noticed in the documentary I was watching last night, they said that during the exact time frame that they said this event happened to them, at 2:14 a.m., the object was actually tracked on radar by the Air Force. And, you know, they keep recordings of the radar screens, you know, they record all that stuff. And yes, to this day, is that information still classified?
I have the report, but I don't think I have all of the reports. I think that part of it probably remains classified. And the reason I say that is I was able to obtain the Project Blue Book report. Mm-hmm. And the report that the Pease Air Force Base in Newington, New Hampshire had picked up a strange craft at 2:14 a.m. Coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, the North Concord, Vermont radar array had picked up a very large object traveling erratically through the sky earlier in the evening. So we have these two reports. But if you read my book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience with Stanton T. Friedman,
rest in peace.
You will see the report. Yes, you will see the reports, and you will see in the footnotes a report written by two military officers from Maxwell Air Force Base. And those military officers wrote a paper titled "Should Project Blue Book Be Reopened?" And one of the cases that they discussed in their paper was the Betty and Barney Hill case. And they talked about the government cover-up of Betty's and Barney's case, and said that although the Air Force did not interview them and claimed that they were not available for further interviews, there was really no reason why they and other witnesses should not have been interviewed. I know of a dozen other witnesses to the craft on that night. Fortunately, Stanton Friedman had contacted the reporter who broke the story as the result of a violation of confidentiality in 1965. Betty and Barney never wanted anyone except for scientists, UFO investigators, and family and friends to know about what had happened. So they also stated in this report, the men from officers from Maxwell Air Force Base, that the radar reports were not spurious blips on the radar screen, that it was a bona fide sighting.
Right.
And for years and years, debunkers and disinformants have argued that there was nothing to the radar report. That was the result of a temperature inversion causing spurious blips on a radar screen. But here you have a report by Air Force officers at Maxwell Air Force Base who obviously knew more about this than I was ever able to obtain in Air Force reports. So I do believe that some of it is still classified. I also found out that when the article was published in the Boston Traveler as the result of a violation of confidentiality, the Hills Air Force files went to the Pentagon, and they mentioned this in the report. So they were saying, isn't this interesting? The Pentagon has a great deal of interest in this case, yet it's passed off as something that was probably the planet Jupiter, just not identified. So what you hear by the debunkers and the skeptics is completely different from the truth in their case.
Absolutely, because the planet Jupiter, that's just ridiculous. The planet Jupiter is not going to be sitting 100 feet in the sky, and it's not going to be picked up on radar.
Absolutely.
What do you think is the stigma with the United States? I mean, I kind of understand where the military's coming from because there's things flying around in their sky that they have no control over. But what do you think is the stigma with them actually just having an open conversation about this and, you know, making it not so hidden, trying to keep it away from the public?
Well, this occurred in 1953, quite a long time ago. Before that, the Air Force was pretty much taking cases seriously. They were investigating them. They were studying them. They wanted to know what these flying discs were. But in 1953, the CIA, who had been studying it for almost a year prior to that, had a meeting. It was called the Robertson Panel. And they had a few government scientists and a couple of Air Force officers who really weren't permitted to say a great deal. But so they looked at a few of Project Blue Book's cases. And the CIA had a great deal of concern that this might affect the body politic. That was the concern that they had. And they thought that it would be best to simply cover all of this up so that the functioning of the body politic could go on as usual. And remember, it was a time during the Cold War, too. Right. So there was concern that this might be used in order to cover up maybe a strike, a preemptive strike by the Soviet Union, that people could be calling in and reporting UFOs when missiles were coming in. That's what they said. I don't know if that was a real concern because there was so much that they fabricated around all of this. And what they wanted to do is to have scientists not use research and investigation to assess all of this. They wanted them to use deductive reasoning. And they established a policy so that anyone thereafter in history who had a case that was a very good evidence case, and these people were respected members of the community. They wanted those cases to be written about by some of these scientists and others, and they wanted the individuals involved to be debunked, to be belittled, to feel ashamed that they had actually reported this. So this was a policy that was set down in 1953. And in 1953, Dr. Donald Menzel, who was a government scientist who was very heavily involved in the cover-up, wrote his first anti-UFO book on this topic. So he had a very long history. He had a very long history with naval intelligence too, and with the CIA and the NSA. Right. So quite a lot of government involvement there that the public didn't know about. Now, my late colleague Stanton Friedman had done some research on Donald Menzel. He wanted to know, who is this guy really? Because here he is, a professor of astronomy at Harvard University, an astrophysicist, the director of the observatory. And he is reputed to have been on MJ-12, the top secret group that was formed after the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash in 1947. So it made no sense. But Stanton was able to obtain permission to go to Donald Menzel's files at Harvard. This is after Menzel's death. And he found a letter that Menzel wrote to John F. Kennedy stating, "I can tell you more when we are properly cleared to one another." And Stan immediately went, "What? Properly cleared? What's this mean?" And then he continued to look, and he found that Menzel really had this secret position in the federal government for many, many years.
Right, that definitely makes sense. One of my questions was, about Stanton Friedman. I understand that you guys met. I wanted to ask you, how did you guys meet? And also, when you guys were doing research together, what other case were you guys most interested on together?
Well, Stanton and I met for the first time the winter after I graduated from the University of New Hampshire. I had gotten married, and my husband and I believe, were at the University of Cincinnati at that time. My first husband was earning his master's and doctorate in the philosophy of psychiatry at the University of Cincinnati. So we would have either been home for the holidays, or maybe we hadn't moved there yet. I'm not certain about that. It was a long time ago. But anyway, Stanton was doing a lecture at the University of New Hampshire. And my aunt Betty was going to go. And so she told us about it, and we went. And that was the first time I had the opportunity to meet Stanton, and I was immediately a big fan. Now, he was also involved in the investigation of my aunt and uncle's case, and particularly the star map. But so Stanton and I, we were aware of one another, and we had seen one another at conferences over many, many years, because I have been in the Mutual UFO Network in various positions since the year 1991. I'm now their national and international director of experiencer research. But back then, I just knew him as a lecturer who I greatly admired, because here he is, a nuclear physicist. He graduated first in his high school class. He graduated from the University of Chicago with bachelor's and master's degrees in physics. So, an extraordinary intellect. He was very scientific and precise in what he did. And I admired that a great deal. But I approached Stanton for the first time in 2004, I believe it was, maybe 2005. I was writing Captured, my book on Betty and Barney and their life, and all of the evidence and the scientific reports and so on and so forth. But I hadn't really studied the star map research.
Yes.
And so I asked Stanton if he would join me in vetting my work on this book that I was writing, and also to write chapters on the star map research that he was the expert on and had been involved in for a very long time. So that's how we really met and started to work together.
Nice. Now the star map, you're like reading my mind. Some of the questions that I had here, you just brought up one about Mufon and also the star map of Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity, I interviewed Dr. Seth Shostak, who's the head of SETI.
Yes.
And we sat down and we talked, and I brought up the star map. And he said that, I believe it was, the year slips me, but he said that they did point their instruments that way towards the cluster, but they didn't really pick up anything. But I did ask him to try again, periodically to look out that way. Interesting about that star map that Betty, that the alien had showed Betty, and she remembered it. And then there was a lady who did research, and she looked all through the stars, and she found this map, this exact this constellation of these stars. And it's just amazing the detail of how accurate that it was. And there's no way Betty could have known that way back then.
Right. Well, let me explain Seth Shostak's position first, because I've been on a panel discussion with Seth last year out in Los Angeles, and he takes the scientist extremely skeptical view of anything. He basically believes if we can't do it, no one else can. And from what I understand of his position, he's not going to take a baby step forward in any of this.
Oh yeah.
In terms
I noticed
of
that with them a little bit. I did notice that, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it made me wonder. Okay, if he's the head of SETI, why is he so skeptical?
Well, in terms of pointing the telescope towards Zeta Reticuli, you have to realize that Zeta Reticuli is, I think it's 39.6 light years away. And so it's a very long distance. And that telescope, to my recollection, was pointed from our planet. So what you have is you have all kinds of interference. That's been a huge problem in even being able to determine how many light years away any other star system is, and if there are planets around that star system. Now we only have the capability of identifying extremely large planets. And for a short time, it was reported that a very large planet had been seen around Zeta Reticuli. And then that was withdrawn for some reason. I don't know why, but I know Zeta Reticuli is really kind of a hot topic and shunned away from by astronomers too. So, that's a little background. When we're able to place satellites out beyond our atmosphere, we can get a better view of what's out there. But we still can only pick up these giant planets. What I can tell you about Zeta Reticuli is that it is located in a volume of space that is believed to have many exoplanets. And to back up a little bit so that people will know what this is all about, when Betty was undergoing hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was an esteemed, renowned psychiatrist from Boston, who had worked during World War II with veterans returning from the front to resolve their post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what we call it then. Back then, they called it shell shock. He had a very high rate of success. So this is why Barney was referred to him, because it was Barney who had developed so many physiological symptoms due to post-traumatic stress disorder. So Betty was under hypnosis. Dr. Simon hypnotized them separately, reinstated amnesia at the end of each session, so they couldn't go home and talk about what they remembered. They couldn't remember it. And Betty said under hypnosis that after her examination was over and she was dressed again, she began to trust the one she called the leader, because he had taken her pain away when a very large needle was inserted into her abdomen. Well, she said to the leader, "I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port?" And so he produced this three-dimensional star map. And there were stars of various sizes and colors on the map. There were two in the foreground that were about the size of nickels. And there were others that were much smaller, the size of the tip of a pencil. And they were connected by solid lines. Some of them, the two in the foreground, had 5 solid lines connecting them, whereas the ones in the background might have had 1 or 2. So then there were other dots, and they were connected by dotted lines. Well, a good thing about Betty is that she had an extremely good memory. I say she had a photographic memory for statistics, for that kind of thing. So Dr. Simon gave her the post-hypnotic suggestion that if she could remember this map accurately, and if it didn't distress her too much, that she would be able to go home and draw it. So that's what she did.
Yeah. And I remember something about the lines and those dots were like places they traveled a lot to, and some of the places where they wanted to go explore, not explore that much, something like that.
Yes, and I do have in my book here that I can show you. Okay, this, I don't know if you can see it, but this is what she drew.
Yes, and I'm gonna edit this video and add some pictures like that in as well. Absolutely. Towards the end, I'm gonna let the whole raw footage go, and I'll put some pictures there as well.
So after Betty finally did draw the star map, there was the violation of confidentiality in 1965. And as a result of that, we met as a family and decided that it would be okay for Betty and Barney to speak publicly about this because it had already been revealed to the public.
Right.
So they spoke about it for the first time at a church in Dover, New Hampshire, and they were introduced by the public information officer from Pease Air Force Base. They had many friends at Pease Air Force Base, many military officers who were interested in their event. And so did you want to say something before I go on?
You're fine. Okay. Believe me, I could sit here and listen to you for hours. Well, yeah, before I want to interject this here. When you were talking about the being that was doing the test on Betty with the needle, that was actually a surgical procedure that doctors here started doing afterwards that this had happened to Betty. And this was how they can determine, like, if someone is pregnant and if the baby is okay.
Yes, yes.
And that's amazing that,
Amniocentesis.
yes, that happened to her, and then later on the doctors here started doing that after the fact.
Yes, it wasn't being used here when she had her experience, and it wasn't being used here when she had her hypnosis session.
Amazing.
So anyway,
that's a good fact right there.
To move on, Betty and Barney finally permitted John G. Fuller to write the first book that was ever written on this topic, The Interrupted Journey. Mm-hmm. And Betty's star map was published for the first time in that book. It's in my book, Captured: The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, with Stanton Friedman, too. And so Marjorie Fish, who was a school teacher from Ohio, later went to work in Tennessee at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory as a research assistant. But at that time, she was a school teacher. And she was an amateur astronomer. And she thought if she could identify where this was in our galaxy, maybe it would be an indication of where these non-human entities came from. At first, she expected to find many matches. But after several years of doing this work, she hadn't found one. And the way she did her work was, because there were no computers, this was a long time ago, she had to go to the university. She had to, couldn't take out the astronomical catalogs. She had to sit down and she had to write all of the distance data for our local galactic neighborhood in all directions, 55 light years from our sun. So what she was looking for was sun-like stars that might have planets. We weren't aware of any that had planets in that time frame. Mm-hmm. And so she took her information, she went home, she did the geometry to figure out where to insert every one of those stars in its proper location in our local galactic neighborhood. Imagine the math involved and the extraordinary feat it was to build three-dimensional models using frames, monofilament line, and pearls or beads of different sizes and colors to represent all of the stars in that volume of space. And she did this over several years. And at the end of 1971, she still didn't have a match. So a new Gliese catalog was released at the end of 71. She found it in 1972, went back to the university, copied down new distance data. And using that new distance data, she went home and built another model. This was her 14th model. She had done many others. Mm-hmm. And this time, when she moved some stars around, and there were 3 stars that were not believed to have been within 55 light years, or we haven't discovered them, they were now on the map. She had a perfect match, or very close match, for what Betty had sketched.
Absolutely. The odds are astronomical. I wanted to ask you, has Mufon been dismantled? Is Mufon still in effect now?
Oh, yes. The Mutual UFO Network is very active.
See, very active. That goes to show you some things on the internet are just not true, because they said it's been dismantled. Yeah.
My goodness. You know, well, Mufon has a lot of haters. I don't like to say that, but there are people who have been very upset over MUFON. And, you know, there are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there who disseminate false information. And most of this stems back to the the early part of the 2007, I think it began, when Robert Bigelow, who is the owner of Bigelow Aerospace Technologies, received a grant and wanted to look into UFO reports and abduction reports. And he gave the Mutual UFO Network a grant to set up our computerized program for cataloging, investigating and cataloging all of the reports that MUFON receives at mufon.com, MUFON.com. And there were special investigators, the best of MUFON's investigators, who applied to be on a special team, a star team, to be funded by Bigelow to go immediately to where there were UFO landings or close encounters, really big cases, and to acquire information. Well, there are people who are highly suspicious of Robert Bigelow and what he was doing, and if he's making reports to the government, and if he was able to obtain the secret information on people. He was not. When anything is confidential in MUFON, you don't get these people's names or addresses, but you do get the information of what happened. Right. Their personal information is expunged. So that's the story behind the conspiracy theorists who see a CIA agent around every corner. And they've really done a hatchet job on MUFON that MUFON does not deserve, in my opinion. I've been a MUFON member since 1991, and I'm their director of experiencer research now, nationally and internationally. They're a very professional type of organization. We are not funded by the federal government. We get our funding from our members.
Yeah, see, I knew that about you with MUFON, and then I was finding some things that were saying that it was dismantled, but obviously that is fake news, people.
It is fake news.
MUFON is still in effect. And I wanted to ask you about, you got into hypnosis, like learning how to do hypnosis and the regression. What made you embark out to try to do that?
I was extraordinarily interested in Dr. Simon's hypnosis sessions with Betty and Barney. And I had gone to the university during one entire summer and went to the journals, the scientific journals, and read everything that I could on academic studies that had been done on hypnosis. And I had written a paper about that. My aunt and I used to do a lot of arguing about it, or I should say discussion. But we had a different point of view. And this is Betty I'm talking about.
Yeah, Betty, and she seems so sweet too.
Yes, she was sweet. She had a terrific personality, was very funny too. We had a dry sense of humor.
I don't know if you can see, I got a little picture of them in the back. On my
yes, I can see it. It's showing up as yellow, black, and white. You can't really see their faces.
Yeah, she's holding a little doggy.
Yes, their dog Delcy, who was with them when they had their abduction experience.
Oh, wow.
So getting back to the experience of why I decided to study hypnosis. After I wrote this paper, I thought it would behoove me to also study hypnosis from a practical point of view, to learn how to do hypnosis and then how to do hypnotic regression And along the way, I learned about forensic hypnosis, which is what police departments used to use for, and the evidence was able to be used in a court of law. It was admissible back until hypnosis was kind of slandered by false memory syndrome researchers, academic researchers.
Do you think you could hypnotize me through Skype? Is that something you ever tried to hypnotize somebody through the internet?
Well,
I'm not asking you to do it now. I would love to have you come back because I have a little couch over there I could lay down on and put my computer over there to see if that would work, because I would like to see if I have any regress memories or anything like that.
Well, let me say, I was a hypnotherapist in New Hampshire. I now live in Florida, and I have recently studied within the past couple of years the Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique invented by Dolores Cannon over about a 40-year period. I like it very, very much. And so what I learned in both of these training classes, many classes that I went to over many hours, is that it is not okay to do regression via Skype or the telephone.
Okay.
It is dangerous in a
Right.
sense, because first of all, you need to be next to a person. If a person has actually had an abduction experience, they might be traumatized by this. You have to be there in their face. You have to be there to immediately be able to say to them, move away from that, move away from that. And you might have to even touch them to say, when I touch you, you will move away. If the person doesn't do that just based on your command. So there's a lot of reason why this type of regression should not be done over the internet or via the telephone. It could be psychological damaging. What happens if you lose your connection?
Yeah, I can't come back, you know?
Yeah, it's extremely important to be with a person, present with a person that you're working with.
Mm-hmm. And overall, do you feel that the ETs, they really actually just meant no harm to Betty? Betty and Barney, because I know at one point in the documentary I was watching, one of the entities, they didn't want them to be able to remember at all. And one was actually going to give Betty some type of tablet or book. And oh man, I wish if she could have brought that back. But overall, do you think that they just really meant no harm to them, you know, doing those examinations?
Well, I don't think that they understood humans very well in that time frame, and I still don't think that they understand humans very well. When they first took Betty and Barney, Betty had never been so frightened in her entire life. She tried to open the car door and run into the woods. They intercepted her. They pointed something at her and she lost consciousness temporarily. Barney had already seen them. He knew that they were the ones who were on the craft. He opened the door, he put his foot on the ground, and then they intercepted him. But he was willing to go without a fight, mostly because he was afraid he would be harmed if he did attempt to defend himself. They reassured Betty and Barney all through this that they intended no harm, that they were only going to do a few simple tests and then they would be on their way. From a human perspective, they were kidnapped.
Yeah. Nobody
said to them, is this okay? May I take you? I would like to do a few simple tests. I'm an astronaut from another planet. So from a human perspective, that wasn't okay. But
Right.
Many experiencers believe that they made an agreement before they came into this life to do this. Betty and Barney were never asked that question. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Betty was taken earlier at another time during her lifetime, but didn't remember it. Because I've done a lot of social research too. Over a 3-year period, Dr. Don C. Donderi, Dr. Michael Austin Melton, and Craig Lang, who has a master's degree, and Denise Stoner, all members of the ERT, worked on a comprehensive study on 516 experiencers. Mm-hmm. And we found that 71% said that they wouldn't end contact today if they had a choice. Wow. So, it makes you wonder that, it seems that it's not as awful as a lot of members of the media make out, or you see in movies. Mm-hmm. Barney still, of course, was very traumatized by what happened to him. Mm-hmm. Even though he wasn't harmed, he was put through procedures that were very embarrassing to him, that it was not kind. He was more or less treated like a dumb human animal. Yeah. In a sense. And Betty as well, being placed on that table, having that needle inserted into her navel, that was so painful. Yeah. They finally removed the pain, but did they let her experience the pain? Yes. Yeah. And I find that over and over again in cases that I investigate, that they wait to remove the pain.
Yes, and Ms. Marden, like I said, I sit here and talk to you forever. At any time you need to go, because I know I did give you a time frame I would like to interview, but at any time you need to go, you just let me know. Okay. Believe me, you got whenever you're ready. Stay with me for as long as you want. I have nothing to do. I'm sitting at home. But can you tell the people how they can keep up to date with you? I noticed you have Facebook and things like that. Can you tell the people all your links?
Yes, my website is Kathleen with a K -Marden, MARDEN.com. There's a lot of information there. You used to be able to order my books there, but because of COVID-19, I've closed the bookstore. You can get them on Amazon and from Barnes and Noble in many different formats. But you'll see all 5 of my books there, plus a lot of articles that you can read. I have a Facebook page too under my own name, so you can visit my Facebook page. It's open to the public as well. And I have time, so we can go on with our conversation. I don't need to end this now.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Okay.
Because I'm stuck in the house too.
Right. And if any time you need to get something to drink or some tea or anything like that, I know you said water. Yeah, I know you said your allergies are messing with you a little bit. And yes. Doing your research, what's one of the latest cases that you've had that a lot of people may not know about? And can you tell some details?
I would like to do that, but I have one more thing I wanted to say about Betty and Barney.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Absolutely. Absolutely.
When Betty was being led down the path to go back to the car, Barney was taken first because she was, that book was taken to from her. Her evidence was taken. She wanted to keep it. She was extremely angry and arguing to keep it. They wouldn't let her take it. Mm-hmm. But as she was being escorted to the car, the leader said to her, "I'm very sorry." This is telepathic. "I'm very sorry that you were frightened by this, so apologizing for this." And she said to him, "I'm just an average person." She really wasn't, but she says, "I'm an average person who I know of scientists who might be interested in speaking with you, and you could communicate with one another. Do you think I could set this up?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. It's not my decision to make." And so Betty said, "Well, how would you find me?" out of all of the millions of people on this planet, how would you find me? And he said, well, we can always find those that we want to find. So it makes me wonder if maybe an implant was inserted into her as well, or they had a way to connect with her vibrational frequency in order to find her.
Yes, I was just going to say that. I wonder if there was an implant, and were they ever x-rayed to see if there were any implants or anything like that?
No, they weren't. Betty refused to be. And unfortunately, Barney died when he was 46 years old from a massive cerebral hemorrhage in 1969. So that was very tragic for Betty and for me too. I loved Barney very much.
Yes, he seemed like a nice gentleman. He was in World War II.
Yes, he was.
I'm coming up on my 46th birthday this summer.
Wow, so Barney looked about your age when he died. So tragic. But to go on to recent cases, I have many, many recent cases. I wrote about some of them in my new book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted. It's kind of a comprehensive guide for experiencers. There's a workbook at the end of every chapter to help people to put all of this into place and process all of it. But it has a lot of information for anyone in the general public who's just interested in it too. I talked about a couple of my major cases in that book, actually 3. And I can explain all of them, if you want, in
Sure.
a few words, just
Yeah,
to tell
absolutely.
you.
I thank you so much, and I definitely got to get on Amazon and order me some books, some up-to-date stuff. I try to find as much stuff as I can online that I can just, for free, I can read and stuff and watch videos and things. But definitely, I will be supporting your books and encourage our listeners out there too, especially in the Coast to Coast AM group that I belong to. Whenever I post my videos in there, the people love them. And
And
if you're
so-
not, follow them on Facebook, the group Coast to Coast AM.
Okay, so the first person that I want to talk about is Denise Stoner. And she and her husband, Ed, lived in Colorado. And this incident happened a long time ago. I started to investigate it around 2010, I believe. And she lived in Florida, lives close to me now, but I didn't know her when I moved here. And I had met her at a meeting. She was Florida Mufon's chief investigator at that time. She's now Florida Mufon's assistant director, and she's also my personal assistant on the experiencer research team. So she's very scientific in the way she does things. But back in the 1980s, she, her husband, Ed, and her 13-year-old daughter traveled every Friday night during the summer to a campground where they would meet her parents and a family friend, and they would stay there for the weekend. They lived in Arvada, a suburb of Denver. And so they had to go over Kenosha Pass, across South Park Valley, up Trout Creek Pass to Buena Vista, where the campground was. So Ed had been in the military, did everything military style. They left at the same time every Friday night. They'd arrive at Kenosha Pass, stop at an overlook and have a little snack, and then they would continue on. So on this particular summer night, they did all of that. It was only about 6 o'clock when they arrived at Kenosha Pass, and they stopped, took a little break, and they started to descend the pass to the valley floor. And as they were doing this, Denise saw a couple of new lights, boom, coming in toward them. And her attention was attracted to them. They finally reached the valley floor. They passed the small town of Jefferson, and they came in very, very close. And she started to try to point them out to Ed. It was still daylight. Ed is driving the car. His hands are gripping the steering wheel. He's looking straight ahead, and he acted as if he didn't even hear Denise. The next thing she knew, the car was being lifted to the side. And then the next thing she knew, they were on Trout Creek Pass, 40 miles away, and it was now dark. They were cold. They were very confused. Denise was extremely upset. She didn't know what had happened. Ed didn't know what had happened. Dee Dee, their daughter, was still asleep in the back seat of the car. The car was no longer moving. So then Ed just started the car up and started driving again. When they arrived at the campground, Denise's parents were walking down to the office. They wanted to call the highway patrol. They were worried that something had happened. The car had broken down, or Ed and Denise had been in an accident. And Denise's mother had dinner waiting for them at 8 o'clock every Friday night. Now it was nearly 11 o'clock. And so Ed and Denise told her parents what they remembered, and they just laughed in their faces. They thought that Ed and Denise were joking. And so they didn't really pursue this. They didn't report it anywhere. But eventually, Denise began to work with a man who was a hypnotherapist. And he hypnotized her a few times. But when I started to investigate the case, she couldn't remember anything said during the hypnosis sessions. And the hypnotherapist had died, and all of the records were gone with him. She was never able to acquire what she had stated. So I decided to investigate their case. I went out to Colorado and I followed that route that they took. I also discovered that there were other reports in that time frame, in that area, of craft observed by others of the same description. So I hypnotized Ed and Denise separately, just like Dr. Simon did with Betty and Barney. And Denise's story was very interesting, where she was absorbed into a beam of kind of bluish green light and carried onto this craft, and felt like her body was coming apart, like, you know, the molecular structure of her body. And then she arrived on this craft, and she was in a darkened hallway with an escort that she knew from other abductions in her life, because she later remembered other abductions. And so she saw these like little gray entities who only moved when instructed to do so. It was almost like they were turned off. She felt like they might have been just robots or biomechanical, standing up against the wall like soldiers. And then she's taken down a hallway and into an examining room where she's put on a table. There is an insectoid entity that she was familiar with, who was the examiner or did the medical procedures. There was also a gray about 5 feet tall, who stood up by her head.
The insectoid kind of looked like a praying mantis, kind of?
Yes, yeah.
I've heard that.
I have an artist rendition in the book that she and I wrote about her experience. I wrote about 6 other cases very interesting. The book is titled The Alien Abduction Files. So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, but if you forget, you can see it on my website.
All this is being recorded. I'm not going to forget.
Okay, so anyway, Denise is lying on the table, and the funny thing is that when people have these experiences, they might be terrified at the beginning, but once they enter the craft, they're calm again. They're calm, peaceful. They're in a familiar environment. It all comes back to them. Strange. And so this non-human entity, the insectoid, has like this long instrument in his hand, and there's a little ball on the end of it. And he inserts it through her ankle. And I believe she and I both believe that that was an implant that he was inserting. And we now know that implants have intelligence. If it is inserted through the ankle, it doesn't mean it stays there. I've actually worked with experiencers who have recently had one inserted and have been able to feel it as it travels up their arm or their leg and then just disappears. It either goes into their head, near their brain. Some of them are in the jaw, underneath the teeth. Some are in front of the ear, some behind the ear. Some seem to land around the collarbone. But Denise is, I'm not sure where this particular one landed, but I did see one that was inserted and was able to palpate it as it moved up her arm. She was going to go and see if she could get an X-ray off it, but it disappeared before she could. So I have all of Denise's medical records as well. And so she also had, after this was inserted, an experience where a large needle was produced. It was attached somehow to the wall, and there was a tube connecting it, and it was inserted into her navel and ova was extracted. She was told during this procedure that she was very important to their project, that they needed to take her DNA for two reasons. One was for humans' benefit, one was for their own benefit, because they had lost the ability to reproduce. And so they had to use gestational tanks, artificial tanks, and even to reproduce their own species.
Wow. So
they also told her that we got to keep some of those that they produced in like a petri dish, blastula, and that this would be inserted into the womb and would have special characteristics and would in all ways look human, but would have certain gifts and certain emotions that humans don't normally have. And in the academic study that I accomplished with Dr. Don Derry and Dr. Melton and others on the team, we discovered that experiencers, especially the abductee group, and we had a way of identifying the abductees as opposed to other experiencers. So the abductee group ended up being more spiritual than others, ended up being empathic, which is a psychic sense where you can feel people's emotions. Mm-hmm. You can't hurt somebody if you are empathic because you feel their pain. And that appears to be something that these non-humans are attempting to accomplish. These experiencers are psychic or intuitive. Mm-hmm. They're very kind and gentle people. it's amazing the changes that take place not only in experiencers but in their offspring.
Yes, hybrids. Definitely have heard of that topic. And it's interesting when you're talking about those implants, because I did see a surgeon who became, if I'm not mistaken, he became a researcher, but he was a surgeon first. And he had actually removed an implant from someone, and then it like disintegrated and disappeared right before their eyes when they had took it out.
Okay, you're thinking about Dr. Roger Lear. Isn't that correct?
Yes, yep, Roger Lear.
He was a podiatrist,
Mhm.
and he lived in California. I knew him, and he did amazing work with experiencers. That was what happened to one implant. That also happened to an implant that was removed by a physician from one of the experiencers that I was working with. And Dr. Lear advised me that I should make sure that the implant was put into human tissue or human blood or plasma before it was shipped to the scientist, because they had a way of just breaking apart and disappearing, exploding. So I did advise the experiencer to have his doctor put it into the blood. The test tube went to Mufon headquarters and then was shipped to the scientist. By the time the scientist received it, it had dissolved.
Yeah, amazing.
Unbelievable. And that's happened to other implants that Mufon has received. It's really disappointing. But Dr. Lear, was able to remove some of these older implants that were metallic, and was able to have them analyzed in scientific laboratories. And some of them had highly unusual properties. They, first of all, could not be rejected by the body, by the human body, as something foreign. They were covered with a very thick kind of biological substance, and they were attached to proprioceptor nerve endings. So actually to the nerves in the human body. When Dr. Lear or any other surgeon that he had removed these did so, the implant would become aware that it was going to be removed, and it would move up the arm of the experiencer. Just amazing. They have intelligence. And what they discovered in different scientific laboratories is, well, one had a radio microwave frequency that broadcast into deep space.
Wow, I remember that. I remember seeing something. It was like emitting radio signals.
Yes, yes. Others were made of meteoric material that is not found on Earth. They appear to have a crystalline structure made of this unearthly material and rare earths, far in advance of anything, any nanotechnology we're capable of producing here on Earth. We used to think that they were tracking devices, but I believe now that they have other properties as well. I think that they put off a signal. So that vibratory signal, maybe that light, it causes them to be able to find humans, because no matter where people move to, they can be on vacation in Paris, France, but live in Colorado. They can be found in Paris. So these entities can find them. I also believe that they're used as communication devices, and entities state that when they are talking about their experiences with other experiencers or with researchers or even on radio shows, they will hear kind of a high-pitched sound in their heads. And also when they touch their implants, they can hear that sound. So we know it's not just tinnitus, the ringing of the ears. It's a different sound than is produced by tinnitus.
Wow.
Also, I believe that it tracks the health of the human body, because many of these experiencers who are now in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, who have been taken periodically over a lifetime, are now receiving healing if they have a problem. And, I think that is just wonderful that they are being healed. Maybe as a payback for all of this volunteer work that they might have done, even though they didn't remember that they had volunteered for this. They were told that they had, or they might have remembered it under hypnosis.
Wow, that's interesting, being healed. And then the doctors here have no explanation as to how someone was healed like that.
Yes, let me give you an example.
Sure.
And it's one of the cases that I wrote about in Extraterrestrial Contact. But I'll tell you a little bit about this case. This is also the same experiencer whose implant dissolved after his doctor removed it. So he's been collecting evidence for me. I've been working on his case for about 9 years now. And he did contact me several years ago, maybe 5 years ago. He was extraordinarily upset. He had been diagnosed with lymphoma, and he was going to have to go in for surgery. And so he was willing to send me his medical records. And I said to him, well, do you believe in God? And he said, yes. I said, well, pray for healing, and I'll pray for you too. And then I said, another thing I'd like you to do, if you're willing, is to send telepathic messages to your non-human entities every day asking for healing. And I said, I'll do what I can to try to communicate with them through telepathy, which I was able to learn to do through meditation.
You got to teach me.
And so I might be able to try to teach you to do that, but not in front of the camera.
Oh, absolutely. I'll take the other, definitely.
Anyway, a couple of weeks later, before he went in for surgery, he sent me a video that he had captured in his bedroom. Now, I had a photograph of him with huge nodes in his neck. But on that video, there was an orb. It was white with a beautiful baby blue halo. You'll see the orb in my book, but it's in black and white. So this slid down his bedroom wall, and then like a butterfly, it kind of flew across the room. It hovered over his body. It put down beautiful iridescent tendrils, and then it dove down into his body. He slept for 12 hours, and when he woke up the next day, those nodes on his neck had disappeared. He couldn't see them. He still went in for the surgery. He wasn't about to say to the doctor, well, I had this experience where ETs healed me. They would think he was a nut. And most people don't want to tell their doctors this. He went in for the surgery, but what they removed was 4 tiny necrotic nodes. So these nodes were in the process of dying and were very tiny. So, I mean, it's almost like a miracle, but he was healed.
I believe it. You know, it's funny you brought up the orbs. I have a friend in Georgia, outside of Atlanta. I'm trying to get him on the show. I'm not going to mention his name now, but he has been seeing orbs in his backyard, not in his front yard. His front yard where his car is parked, and he has cameras set up outside, and he's been capturing orbs. He just seen one like a couple days ago, and he doesn't know what they are. I was telling him, you know, those are classic orbs, what you're capturing.
Uh-huh.
Those
What
orbs.
color are they?
He described it as bluish greenish colors with the white in the middle, but bluish
Okay.
green haze around him. He was saying,
Uh-huh.
and I know those orbs have been associated with crop circles, and some people see the orbs coming out of UFOs,
Mhm.
like they're little drones, or maybe they're
They
type-
turn into ETs
Yeah.
when they come out of the UFO and go down that beam into the experiencer's home.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, they do many things. They contain ET consciousness,
Mm.
and they come in various colors, but 60% of the abductee group has seen these orbs in their homes. They have conscious recall of it. And some have sent me photographs.
I've heard that too. As a couple in Miami in their home, they said one appeared in their living room and like went through their kitchen and then went through the wall
Mhm.
down
Yes.
in Miami. So yeah, I believe it. Where I live at, not too far away from here, there's a place called Jensen Beach, Florida. I don't know if you ever heard of Jensen
Yes.
Beach, Florida,
Uh-huh.
but that is a apparent UFO hotspot over there where a lot of people see them above water, above the ocean.
Uh-huh.
And things like that. Now, 2 days ago, I had the pleasure, God's been blessing me. I was able to interview Erich Von Dniken.
Oh,
out,
wow.
Yeah, out in Switzerland.
Uh-huh.
And he's with the ancient astronaut theory. Do you think that these beings have been coming here for thousands, if not millions of years? And are they, just like you say, some of them could look like humans and we don't even know, and they're just among us already?
Yes. Well, I've met Erich Von Dniken, and we spoke at the same conference a few times, and I might even be speaking on a cruise out of Florida that's going to be leaving in 2021 if the COVID-19 improves, and that can happen. And he's going to be on that ship. If this takes place, it's an ancient aliens kind of Erich Von Dniken type cruise.
Mm-hmm.
And so do I believe that this has been going on for a long, long time? Yes, I do. I do. And I base this on a variety of different things. One of these things are the ancient drawings that you see on cave walls, the ancient structures or drawings you see on the land that Erich Von Dniken has talked about so many times. There's evidence in some historical places that there was construction that we cannot even do today. Stones are cut with laser precision and there are tons and tons and tons, and they had to be lifted and placed in to where they belong. So my question is, did we have an advanced society at one time on Earth, technologically advanced, and did something happen and we went back to being primitive again?
Yeah.
Or was this just ancient aliens? I don't have the answer for that.
Yeah.
But I do know that Major General John Alexander Samford, back in 1952, at the largest press conference that had been ever been conducted since the end of World War II, it was held because there were UFOs seen by many people over Washington, D.C. in that month on several occasions. And what he said is that these phenomena have been seen in the sky dating back to biblical times. That was one of his statements. So, here it is, a major general saying this.
Yeah, I think I know the clip you're talking about. I know Erich Von Dniken, he said he's working on a new book, and he said that recently they've discovered some new chambers inside pyramids, and he's going to be bringing that to light because he said, these are things you won't hear about in the news. they just try to suppress it and everything.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, he's an amazing man. And I am very interested in that, although I don't do that kind of research because I spend full time just doing my research and investigation.
Yes, absolutely. And I am so thankful to have you here. The floor is yours. Please tell me something else. Unless you got to go, let me know. Like I said,
no, I don't have to go. In fact, I didn't know how long we'd be speaking, so I planned for at least 2 hours.
Okay, thank you. I thank you so much.
So I see we have time left.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I have nothing to do, and I can't wait to kick back and listen to this later on with my wife and my children.
So I was going to tell you about another case that I wrote about in Extraterrestrial Contact.
Mm-hmm.
And this was another important case. The man was a commercial pilot, and he ended up retiring from flying jets with passengers and opened up a small airport in the Southwest. And he had no interest in UFOs, had never had a sighting. But he was living with his wife in an apartment that was connected to the hangar. They decided to live there until they built a house nearby. Mm-hmm. This was a few miles away from the town, and it abutted Native American land. And so he heard people outside his apartment one night. He heard voices out there, and he was always afraid that there were going to be teenagers going out and drinking and destroying things. So he went out to see what was going on. Mm-hmm. It wasn't teenagers, they were adults, and they were pointing into the sky to a UFO, to something that he had never seen before. He said the lights on this thing were more intense than anything he had ever seen. Mm-hmm. And he became interested in trying to look for more UFOs. So he did some really crazy things. He went up into his control tower, and he had these huge laser pointers. And when he would see something that he thought was not a conventional craft, he knew it wasn't conventional, because if it was conventional, he'd be in big trouble for hitting it with a laser pointer. Right. He hit it. And these crafts responded. Mm. And eventually they came in closer and closer. He has photographs of crafts that were hovering just above the ground. And his idea was, since he knew absolutely nothing about this topic, that he would be able to get one to come in and land, and he would enter the craft, or they would come out and they would just sit down and have a nice conversation together about what these non-human entities were doing. Mm-hmm. Well, it didn't turn out that way.
What happened?
He ended up being abducted.
Oh, wow.
And his wife left him. And so he was alone out there, and he was terrified. And then he shot one of them, and it exploded in a flash of blue light.
He shot one of the UFOs?
No, an entity in his bedroom.
How did he describe it?
It was tall, it was bark brown, he said. I don't know if it was a mantis or a reptilian or what it was. Mm-hmm. But he had seen this entity before. It was with 3 small white entities. They were only about 3 feet tall, 3.5 feet tall, dressed in silver outfits with like silver roper boots. I'm not even sure that these entities were extraterrestrial. A lot was going on there that was very much like the events on the Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what you're describing, those white entities, I heard someone describe those at Skinwalker Ranch, which was owned by Bigelow, and somebody from the story I remember, one of these beings, there was like a car and there was nobody in the car, and it like floated up through the car, and I guess it had like a protector mother type of being that was watching over these littler ones.
Mm-hmm.
And this being would really physically harm you if you were to try to hurt these little ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that those are just negative interdimensionals.
Mm.
I'm not certain of that,
Right.
but I know that his experiences were extremely negative.
Mm.
At one point, he handcuffed himself to the wall when he went to bed at night, and he had put boards on over all of his windows. He finally fled, but there were things going on there. It's in the book, Extraterrestrial Contact. There were things going on there, like time slips.
Mm-hmm.
His family thought that he was having a psychiatric issue, and so he said to his mother, "Just come out and spend the night with me, and I'll prove to you that this is happening." So she did. They looked out the window. They thought that they were going to see the runway, and what they saw was daylight and mammoths grazing on a grassy savanna.
Wow. I've heard a similar story about something similar to that, where this gentleman said I forgot exactly where it was, but this gentleman said he was walking along a path, and next thing you know, he said what looked like a dinosaur appeared in front of him for less than a minute, and then it just dissolved and disappeared. So it was kind of like a time slip type of thing going on there too.
I hypothesize that interdimensional portals are being opened for one reason or another. I don't know if it's because of the very powerful electromagnetic fields now, if it's because extraterrestrials are opening these portals and not closing them. I know that the one at Skinwalker Ranch has been open for 200 years.
Mm.
And on Tuesday nights now at 10 o'clock, there is a show on the History Channel on Skinwalker Ranch. You should watch it. It's very interesting. They had the first episode last Tuesday night.
I not too long ago, I watched George Nappa's Skinwalker Ranch documentary, and that was interesting. Hopefully, I'll get George Nappa on here next week.
Yes.
You know, he's so busy. He said to give him about a week, so I'm hoping to get him on.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever been interviewed by George Knapp?
I have. Yeah.
Awesome.
He's
awesome.
Very bright.
Yes.
Highly credible.
Broke the Area 51 story to the world as for Bob Lazar, I believe it was back in 1981.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't wait to get him on. What do you think about CERN? You know, CERN, a lot of people think over there in CERN, they're trying to open up portals, or they're playing around with in dimensions.
Yes, I think that portals have been opened in a number of places around the world, and maybe that's the reason that there are portals in these different places, maybe more so than we were ever aware of, but I can't say that for certain, because maybe they're just being reported now.
Yeah, and a lot of UFOs have been seen on like Indian reservations and like protected land areas.
Yes.
Where apparently, I guess they think military cannot even go there. There's some kind of law, whatever, where the military can't fly in there, or they got to fly around it, or what have you. And a lot of people see UFOs, in those areas. Yes.
Well, there's Native American land around the ranch, the Skinwalker Ranch.
Right.
And the Utes, and I think it was the Uintas, and another Native American tribe, were in a battle because the Utes were capturing Uintas and putting them into slavery. And so it was, and I could be wrong with the name Uinta, but this tribe, Native American tribe, had a shaman who cast a spell on that land, according to legend.
Mm.
Now, what they were able to discover, and I learned this on the television program that aired for the first time last Tuesday night,
Check that out.
was that there is a ridge that runs along the ranch. And these scientists and investigators climbed to the top of this ridge with all of their equipment, devices to measure radio microwave energy, electromagnetic fields, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They said that there was an electromagnetic field on that ridge that was dangerous to the human body. It was that high.
Mm. So
it was electromagnetic radiation. So here we have electromagnetic portals, whatever, coming in here. And I suspect, after all of the investigations that I have done over the past 30 years, that is part of the story. It's a commonality in these different cases.
Yeah, might have something to do with the Bermuda Triangle. The
Possibly.
The energy there, where ships and planes disappear without a trace.
Mm-hmm. And some people hypothesize that there is an underground base, extraterrestrial base there.
You heard of David Wilcock?
Yes, I've heard of him.
He was just a few days ago, he was just saying that it's going to come out. So apparently it may come out this year. They say that Atlantis has been discovered up under Antarctica, where people have, I forgot the name of the Admiral Byrd. Admiral Byrd. Where they were seeing UFOs coming in and out of the water there. Do you think there could be an underground base under Antarctica?
Who knows? I know there's a lot of publicity around this. A lot of people are hypothesizing, but I take a scientific approach to all of this. And so I'm very interested in looking at the evidence. I haven't seen the evidence yet, but I'll believe it when I see the evidence. And it's overwhelming evidence. So I don't like to do a lot of speculating. Anything that I say that is speculative is based upon facts that I have been able to acquire in my investigations.
Nice. And the book with Stanton Friedman, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, based on years of your research. I can't wait to check that out. I definitely am falling behind a little bit. There's so much information out there. It's hard to keep up with it all.
I know. I can't keep up with it either. So, but that is a great book, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, because Stanton and I had a real interest in people like Dr. Donald Menzel, who I spoke about previously, and Philip Klass, who was the go-to guy for the mainstream media, the probably the most prolific anti-UFO propagandist of the 20th century.
I think I know who you're talking about.
And so we did an extraordinary amount of research about the history of government involvement in the investigation of UFOs, going to the actual government records, their major studies, their findings in these major studies, and their decision to cover up their findings. Why? And who was involved in the cover-up? Who was carrying out the government's false propaganda program? Mm-hmm. And so that book, I love that book. I loved writing it. We did a lot of research at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. I have Philip Klass's FBI records.
Oh, wow. And
so I'm very proud of that book. It's one of my favorites.
Awesome. Let me ask you, doing all your research for so long, has anyone, have you ever had any visitations by Men in Black, or anyone try to, threaten you or try to make you stop your type of research? Anybody try to like scare you or anything?
You know, I was frightened after I wrote Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, when someone called me and identified himself as an intelligence officer. And he said, "We like what you and Friedman are doing. And if the time comes that we don't like what you're doing, we'll let you know." So I was a little rattled by that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Men in Black, don't mess with us. We're just having conversation. A lot of this information is out in the public as it is, you know, and you can't try to deny people's what they see with their own eyes. And
After I wrote the alien abduction files, I was warned that they did not like what I was doing. That I was frightening people by telling, you know, these 6 abduction events that I investigated. So I was advised they didn't like that. There was interference with the shows that I did. That was far more than just normal interference that you might have with shows. And we had like 100 shows set up to publicize that book. And time and time again, the stations just went down.
Well,
but we were able to. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I know it's a little hard on the Skype, but I just want to thank you and salute you for your courage and, you know, just continuing on doing this for so long. I thank you so much.
You're welcome. You know, I think that it's really important. I try to stay within federal guidelines and not frighten people. I'm trying to help people. The information that I reveal is all in government records that I was able to acquire, or all part of my personal investigations. I don't talk about or write about anything that anyone else might have promoted or written, because I don't know for certain that their information is accurate. I have to go there, do the research, and find out for myself.
Do you have any plans of making any new video documentaries?
I don't know what you mean.
Or maybe like a movie. Anybody want to come to you and make a movie for you about your research and your experience being the niece of Betty and Barney Hill? I think that'd be a great autobiography type of movie for you. It's a great idea, I think.
I've given testimony on some videos, the movies that are now available. You'll find one of those advertised on my website that I appeared in. I've worked on others. A lot of times when I'm at conferences, people will ask for interviews from me on my work and to go into a movie. I do have a contract for a movie on Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Mm-hmm. And still waiting for the funding to come for that. It's going to take a lot of funding. And Bryce Zabel, who is a Hollywood producer, has the agreement on that. So I'm hoping that someday that will be published. I've had another person come to me and say, you know, we should do a video on you to be sold on his site, but I don't know. It wasn't laid out well, and so I didn't pursue it. Because if somebody wants to do something on me personally and my work, I want it to be highly professionally done. Right.
Absolutely. I enjoyed the movie where James Earl Jones had played Barney.
Yes.
That was awesome. And for James Earl Jones, looking at him when he was younger to portray, and I think he did an excellent job in his acting. You know,
I thought he did too.
Yeah.
Yes. The only problem I had with that movie is that it gave the impression that Betty and Barney only remembered a light in the sky, and then everything else came through hypnosis, which is absolutely false. All of the true information is
Yeah.
documented, and you can see documents too in Captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. And also next year will be the 60th anniversary of their experience. My book is being updated. I've written an update for it, and I'm going to be doing a lot of lectures in that time frame too on the updates. So you will see when I do a lecture, you see all of the documented evidence. I don't just stand there and talk. I show you that what I'm saying is accurate.
Yeah, I think someone should remake their story again. We should have a modernized, newer movie of their experience, go into a lot of detail, and let you be like a producer on it. That way, people do get the real story.
Yeah, and I think that that's what Bryce Zabel wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I will definitely be, maybe an actor will play me,
Right.
but someone will play my part in this new film as soon as the funding comes forth. Now, Bryce told me that there is a lot of money available to make a horror movie, but we're not going to make a horror movie. This was not a horror story. Betty and Barney were frightened, but after they came to understand what had happened, they lost their fear and thought that they were treated reasonably well.
Well, it sounds like Mr. Zabel, he may be well connected with some peoples. My opinion, tell him if he can to try to reach out to Dan Aykroyd.
Dan Aykroyd wants to play Dr. Simon. I already have the letter stating that.
Okay, we got a little psychic thing going on right now, because I was thinking Dan Aykroyd might want to be a producer, and you tell me he's going to be part of that. So that's amazing. I salute Dan Aykroyd. I'm trying to get in contact with you, buddy. Trying. That's awesome. And once again, I want everyone to check out her website, which is Kathleen-Marden.com. The link will be in the bio for this video, the description. And I thank you once again. Thank you so much for your.
You're welcome. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for inviting me to have our conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And you have the longest episode so far. I don't want to get on people's nerves and try to bug them too much. I know you got things to do, but I want to thank you so much. I salute you. I know Betty and Barney and your mom, they're watching down. I know that they're proud of you too.
I'm sure they are. Thank you
so much. All right.
Goodbye.
Bobby, what are you doing up at this hour?
Still don't know what it is or where it comes from, but there's something there.
Bobby, you've been dreaming again.
Where'd you see all this, Bobby?
As a matter of fact,
Bobby, what are you doing up at this hour? Bobby, you've been dreaming again.